Hello, everyone. Intuitive and astrologer Lisa Salvatore here. I'm so excited to be back with you today with my friend and fellow astrologer, Natha Perkins. Hello, Natha. How are you?
Hey, everybody. Hey, Lisa.
Natha, why don't you just tell everybody a little bit about you, and then we will get started and dive right into Saturn and how this planet shows up and plays out in our lives. Personally speaking, will be the emphasis, but we'll also touch on collective.
Yes, I'm glad to be back. We had so much fun doing our Pluto talk, and thank you to everybody that left us comments on that and shared how helpful it was. So now we want to come back and talk a little bit more about Saturn because it is such a planet. Ooh, we're all feeling it right now. So I'm also an astrologer, and I like to teach astrology and use astrology through the psychological, spiritual lens. I use it as a tool for teaching you more about yourself because the human psyche is hard to understand, but astrology gives us really the map straight into understanding that. So that's how I use astrology. And I have a podcast that I release on YouTube every week and on podcast platforms. And I also teach a lot, and I have apprenticeships and mentorships. And then, of course, I do private readings. So I am so psyched to be back here and really dive into this topic of Saturn because everybody is a little bit scared of Saturn in the
Mm.
same way they're scared of Pluto. But I think you and I did a good job. We had fun kind of breaking down Pluto. So we get to do it with Saturn this time.
Yeah, I refer to Saturn as the misunderstood miser, because you'll understand that more deeply in a moment when we talk about the origin of Saturn and what he represents. But the thing about Saturn is that he can be tough. He can be tough on us. He requires us to step up, show up, and grow up. And it's when we avoid those processes, that process, that we really struggle. When we identify and understand how to work with our own unique Saturn energy, Saturn placements, it does make life a little bit easier. And there's a deeper spiritual understanding of what's really going on, because Saturn is all about our karma. He is the keeper of time. He doesn't let us get away with anything. And if we do get away with it, he will catch up to us at a later date, and we will have to pay the spiritual piper. I mean, and we will literally have to pay for, it's what you reap. Is that what you sow? That is how Saturn operates.
Yeah, I feel like with Saturn, we dread Saturn a little bit because it's the energy that kind of tells us what to do. And truthfully, none of us like to be told what to do on one hand. And on another hand, being told what to do can make things simpler. It can give us the structures that we operate within. So when we're talking about Saturn, we're also talking about the laws, and we are talking about the governing bodies, and the governing bodies meaning the people that are telling us what to do and how to live, but also our inner critic and our internal governing body and our parents. And so Saturn is a really complex archetype because, on one hand, yeah, we have to follow the rules, and we don't always like that. But like you said, if we don't follow certain rules, there can be a taking responsibility in the future. It's like if you get caught speeding, you have to pay a speeding ticket. And so that's one way of looking at Saturn. And the other way of looking at Saturn is like, well, what if I don't want to follow the rules because they're not in my own sense of integrity? And that's a whole other piece of it. So
Mm.
Saturn can be a little bit confusing. Like, wait, who am I supposed to listen to and what am I supposed to be doing? But we're hoping to break that down today and kind of give you guys more insight into like all the different facets of Saturn and how to make Saturn work for you instead of always running scared.
Yes. And we all deal with Saturn. Saturn runs in 7-year increments, 7-year cycles. We all deal with Saturn time and time again on our journey here. Sometimes we'll feel louder, other times we'll feel softer. And we're here to break that down to help you to understand why and how this works and plays out in our own personal realities. I do want to mention keywords for Saturn: boundaries. He represents boundaries that we abide by, that we live within or do not. He represents structure, where we either need more structure or just simply don't have enough structure, and or discipline. He's all about discipline. Saturn also governs over the disciplinaries in our lives, as in our elders, our fathers, our mentors, our grandfathers, all of, and females as well, all energies. He is the ones above us that tell us what to do, essentially. Whether we abide by their laws or their rules is another story, but this is what Saturn represents. He also talks about repetitive lessons, because until we grasp what's really going on, we're going to repeat the same patterns. And that's not what Saturn wants for us. Saturn wants us to heed the lesson and transform and evolve through it and become more smarter because of it. Working smarter and not necessarily harder is the goal of Saturn energy. So we tend to dread it because he does present challenges for us time and time again. But the more we grasp and lean into those challenges, the more we understand our own unique energy. Another key word I always associate with Saturn is gravity, because we literally feel the weight of Saturn, the gravity of Saturn always throughout our lives. Even the easier placements, we will feel that gravity somewhere.
Yeah, and Saturn work is hard. It's our life's great work. So we're going to go towards a little bit later. We're going to go into Saturn and the sign that Saturn might be in your birth chart and the house that it might fall in your birth chart. And we're going to go through and we're going to talk about what your life's great work is, because that's what Saturn represents. It is that work that takes us ages to do, because like you said, Lisa, we make mistakes and we have to learn from the mistakes. So a lot of us also want immediate gratification, or we want to be the instant expert, or we want to have already learned the lesson and gotten to the successful place. But Saturn is not about that. I mean, Saturn wants us to work smarter, not harder. But Saturn also says, hey, listen, if you want to run a marathon, you have to train. You have to run for hundreds of hours before you're going to be strong enough to run the marathon. And, depending on what your relationship is to hard work and to perseverance, some of us are better at that than others. Saturn work can feel really daunting, and it can also feel really boring and really mundane. And like, I don't want to do it. And yet, like if you spend 100 hours running, you're going to be really good at running. You're going to be really strong, and you're going to be able to meet the challenges, the blisters, the running out of water. You're going to know what to do, and you won't be a total noob, which is what Saturn is reminding us. Like, hey, you started off as a novice, period. And you are going to finally, if you follow my rules, if you are disciplined, you are going to get to be the master. So this is about our journey from novice to master. And I think we all want to be masterful in our lives, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And Saturn, I always refer to him lovingly as the parent that stands over you while you're eating your vegetables and will not let you go outside to play with your friends until you finish your vegetables. Saturn's like, okay, listen, you can go outside, but you know the rules. I need you to eat what's good for you here, and then you can go outside and play. That's very indicative of Saturn energy. Saturn also wants us to mature. That's a key word for Saturn. And it doesn't matter how old you are. We're constantly maturing here on our journey. So maturation is another key word for Saturn. I'm going to go ahead and pull in the slides here, just some bullet points for Saturn for us to discuss. Key things about Saturn that you should know is that Saturn has about a 29-year cycle approximately. It takes Saturn 29 years to go through the whole entire zodiac. Now, when divided by 4, this gives us approximately 4 separate 7-year intervals. Like we mentioned earlier, Saturn runs in 7-year cycles, 7-year increments. Every 7 years, Saturn makes what we call a trigger aspect back to its own placement. And sometimes, again, they're louder, they're softer, they feel more daunting, they feel more tumultuous, they feel more challenging, and sometimes they're more smooth, and we can really reap the benefits of our hard work. Now, depending on, of course, what else is going on with your personal astrology at these times of the Saturn cycles and other planetary aspects, these periods will feel more challenging or less. Natha, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, so we're looking at the Saturn in your chart. So by the way, this is a good time
Oh,
to
yes.
get your own chart. You can pull it up on astro.com or on, I like just astrologythings.com. And I know, Lisa, you have something on your website
Yes, right
that
on.
gives a free chart.
Yep, right on my homepage, lisasalvatore.com. You just scroll down and click on free birth chart.
Yeah, so pull that up so that you can look at your own chart and have the visual, because we're talking about Saturn in the sky as it moves around the sun. It will make angles to the Saturn in your chart. And, these are all things that are bringing us into a deeper sense of maturity, where we are learning at really specific increments. And this is true for you. This is true for the people that you love. And that's one of the cool things about knowing a little bit of astrology, because you can say what was happening for me in my life when this was, at this age. And, my kid, my grandson, my lover, what age are they at? And are they being impacted by one of these Saturn transits? Because when someone's being impacted by a Saturn transit, then this whole concept of something needs to be mastered starts to come front and center. And I think that's why you and I like to teach astrology, Lisa, because we're like, hey, if we can help even one person
Mhm.
understand what's happening in their life, that makes a huge difference.
Huge ripple
Yeah.
effect.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's why we both are always trying to promote astrology to everyone, just to even understand the basics of your birth chart. I know sometimes it gets really overwhelming when you hear astrologers talking about degrees and aspects and all these points and placements. It can be frustrating. But if you can just focus on the basic placements in your birth chart, the sun, the moon, Saturn, your rising sign, that within and of itself will just give you such a doorway into your own unique spiritual psychology. It's quite fascinating. All right, now let's go into the maturation process of Saturn as he works throughout our lives.
So here's how I like to look at it. When we are age 7 or 8, this is when we have gotten into about first grade, sometimes second grade, and we are beginning to understand that there is a different kind of authority out there. We
Mm,
have had our parents as our authority who have been training us and guiding us, and we've learned what their version of Saturn is. These are their rules. And then we get into school and we start to get into first, second grade where it's less about like, having tea parties and it's more about having to learn the math and the reading. And we look around and we realize we have these teachers now. And these teachers are another form of authority. And now not only do we have to follow the rules of our family, but we also have to follow the rules of our school. And so this can be difficult, or this can be liberating, depending on what kind of a child you were. And then when we go to 14 to 16, this is when Saturn has made another 7 year, and now it's making an opposition to your natal Saturn. Think about your own life when you were 14 to 16. This is when you get into high school and you start to realize, like, hey, I don't really want to follow these rules anymore. And also, now I have my peers, and I'm really concerned about what my peers think about me. And so now, not only is my authority with my family and my teachers, and I'm kind of pushing up against the authority of my teachers, but I really care what my peers think. And my peers become an authority. And then we fast forward to 21, 22, and this is where we are about to graduate from college, and we are really looking at our lives and saying, oh, this is me about to enter into a new sense of freedom. This is me about to be able to move out into the world. And I'm still carrying the rules and regulations of my family, my teachers, my peers. But also, there's a sense of like, I've learned a lot, and now I'm going to go out and forge into the world. Well, then we hit 28 or 30. And I think that if anybody has been through their Saturn return, which probably most of us have, if you just look back at this point in your life, this is usually when it feels a bit like the
it
hammer comes
sucked.
down. Yeah. Yeah, because this, and we say in astrology, like the Saturn return is really the crossing the threshold into adulthood. But this is where we're like, oh,
Yeah.
I have to make a lot of money. I have to buy a home. This is when we start, the societal expectations start to really coalesce, and we start looking around and saying, am I following the rules? And also, do the rules fit?
Mm.
I'll let you take it from here, Lisa.
Well, I think this would be a good time to pull the tarot into the maturation process of Saturn. So the chariot in the tarot, that is number 7. And this is a card that's ruled by the sign of Cancer. But more than that, this is a card about sort of like feeling your way through life, feeling your way through the energy. It's a very intuitive card. So think about 7 to 8 years old. You're now really coming into your own feisty being and you're learning how to assert your own energy. And we test our parents, we're testing boundaries to see how far we can go. But now we're taking that into a different sense of discipline as we move outside of the home and into other environments, school being one of them, where now it's like, well, I have to figure out how can I assert my power and boundaries in this new environment. So that comes in with a whole new layer of recognition and discipline, which then results in more learning and maturation.
Yeah, I love it. And this concept of like, how can I assert my boundaries without getting in trouble
Right.
is so Saturnian,
Yeah,
right? Because it's like
absolutely.
we're trying to balance other people's rules that we have to follow, but
Right.
also coming into our own power in a way. So I love how you brought that in.
Yeah. And then when we get to 14 years old, 14 to 16, number 14 in the tarot is the Temperance card. And this is a card that is ruled by Sagittarius. And so there's a sense of wanting to be free when we get to this point. But there's a lot of weird things going on with our body. We're learning, like our body's developing differently. We're going through puberty. We're, like you mentioned, we're connecting with peers, and we're really trying to figure out who we are. And this is a card about alchemizing the energies and all parts of ourselves. In fact, this is where it's like, well, am I gay? Am I straight? This is Hermes, Hermaphrodite. So it's very much like, who am I? We're trying to figure that out at this point. And some people don't really know when we get to this space. And again, there comes in that level of, can I be who I truly am? What will my peers think? What will my parents think? What will the authority figures think? So this can be and is almost always a very unique and challenging time in one's development. I don't think anybody watching this who's past that point would disagree with that, right, Natha?
Right. And that's the thing about you bring in the idea of the temperance, right? And with
Mm-hmm.
Saturn is the Lord of time.
Mm-hmm.
And so these Saturn cycles are 7 years. It's long. It takes a really long time. So when you're 14, 15 and you're trying to figure out who you are,
Yeah.
you're not going to even know. It's like these answers do not come immediately. And part of that Saturn lesson is in continuing to just show up, continuing to
Yeah.
watch the energy of other people and
Mm-hmm.
what the authorities think and what my peers think and how I feel. So there is this frustrating element of needing time and patience, but also this really beautiful alchemizing element of like, don't worry, it's all going to come together. You just keep showing up. And I think that's an important thing to remember about Saturn.
Absolutely. Personally speaking, I know that corner of my life was extremely challenging, and I was so into astrology at that point, and I'm so grateful that I had that in my pocket because I believe it really saved me from going down a bad path or a worse path. I was very depressed. It was a very challenging time in my life. There was a lot of things going on. School was rough. It was a lot. And I am so grateful that I had this tool in my pocket. And I also love that I'm working with more and more parents that are trying to help their children in a different way. And then actually the under 18 population, I love working with them because they don't even see their own greatness half the time because they're so focused on what they don't love about themselves that they tend to gloss over the wonderful parts of themselves. And so I really feel like it's just so empowering to be able to help them alchemize, especially at this point in life.
Yeah, and also just to give them permission to be right where they're at.
Yeah.
So, I have teenagers. I have a lot of teenagers in my life, and a lot of their friends come to me for readings. And I love teenage clients for the same reason that you do,
Right.
because to be able to say, hey, this is normal. This is what you're going through, and watch them kind of light up like, oh,
Right.
this is like, oh, I mean, to have somebody just verbalize it,
Mm-hmm.
that's huge. I wish I'd had that.
Huge. And then we get to number 21. This is the World, and this is the card ruled by Saturn. So when we get to 21 years old and we're going through that closing Saturn square, we're recognizing there's some sort of freedom that comes with this point in life, right? We're adults officially, 21. I don't even know if the age has changed, but I know 21 is the legal drinking age and other things. So we're coming into this newfound sense of freedom. But with that comes the challenge of discipline. I have to discipline myself. I have to study. I have to be careful. I can't drink too much. Don't drink and drive. All those other things that were not an option or issue before really can come full circle as we get to this point of our Saturn cycle. And also it's graduation. Literally, when you graduate from school, for example, you could graduate from just a part of your life goes to a different level, that's when we get to this point of the cycle of Saturn and of the tarot. And by the way, if anybody wants, I have a free tarot masterclass that goes through the 22 major arcana tarot cards. You can download it. It's right on my website under courses. Again, it's free. You will have to put your email in, but it's free. Okay. So you can always go and check that out if you want to learn more about the tarot. And I also obviously connect the astrology with it too.
Yeah, a tarot and astrology are beautiful tools together for insight. And I mean, that's what we're going for here, right? It's like the more insight that each of us has about these cycles, about these energies in our lives, then we're not doing it blindfolded. And there's a lot of power in that.
There's a method to the mystical madness, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to mention one other thing about the closing Saturn square at 22 years old. That's also a point where we're going into the Uranus square, right? So it's also that point of our lives is particularly challenging on a multitude of levels, but we are really learning who we are. And then on top of that, we're getting hit with a lot of outside forces and some unexpected challenges that we have to navigate on top of if anything else is going on. So it really is a time where we do need to, if you have children in that age bracket, family, loved ones, friends, maybe give them a little bit more grace because they might not know what they need.
Yeah. And Saturn stuff can hit pretty hard. Like we said earlier, one of the problems with Saturn is that when we're being asked to grow up, we're often being asked to do stuff that has a flavor of being boring or being monotonous. Like it's fun to graduate from college and it's great to be able to drink and have the autonomy and the freedom, but usually this throws you out into the world and now you have to make a living and you have to pay all of your bills and you have to really move into adulting in a new way. And adulting is not that easy and it just doesn't really feel like it gets easier. And so there's this coming to understand like, oh, I've spent all this time yearning to grow up, yearning to be me, yearning to graduate. And then I get there and it's like, oh, okay.
This is what it is? Right. Yeah, I know. Well, let's just go back to the slides for a moment. Okay. Here is the symbol for Saturn. The symbol for Saturn is an ancient scythe or sickle because Saturn was known as the god of seed sowing and also the keeper of time. And to the Romans, he was also the god of agriculture. And again, keeping to the theme of maturation, how do we grow crops? We plant the seeds and then we take care of them, we water them, and in time they sprout, but it's not an overnight process. So it's just another reminder of the way that Saturn operates in our lives. And the lessons of Saturn, there's so many as we've discussed, but it's about recognizing and honoring your own karma and your own journey with karma. Simply matter. It's a means to an end. It's what goes around, comes around. It's a circle. It's a consequence. It's consequence of all of our actions and also inaction. It's what we reap is what we shall sow, both in this lifetime and previous lifetimes. Saturn demands that we step up, show up, and grow up by where he shows up in our chart and in our lives. The Romans referred to Saturn as Lord of Karma, keeper of time. He is considered a malefic, and that's why a lot of people really abhor Saturn because he is cold and distant in the sky, literally, and he can show up this way in our lives. But again, it's like his stern eyes are on us, wanting us to just grasp the lesson, which is that we are our own teacher and guru at the end of the day, and it's through those lessons we learn how to move forward into totality of our being. He's all about discipline and boundaries. He's the daddy of our charts, work before play as it pertains to the area of the sky, and in the chart he was at birth. Natha, do you want to add to that?
Well, I'll just say that, one of the things that is, I think, the hardest lesson to learn about Saturn, but the most important one is that, in order to accelerate your Saturn lessons, it's about understanding your own sense of integrity. So when we're talking about this karma stuff, it's not to say that like when you're bad, then something bad is going to happen to you. But the quicker that you are able to land on what your own personal ethos is, what am I willing to do and what will I not do? And so I have a Saturn teaching and I talk about how there's these levels of I'm not going to, I'm going to speed because I don't want to follow the rules. And then I get caught for speeding and then I'm mad at the cop. and it's the
Mm,
cop's fault. So that's like a pretty low level version of like, I don't really have a sense of, my sense of what is right and wrong just has to do with like what I want to do.
right.
Doesn't, it's a disregard for the rules. Eventually we get to a place where I'm not going to speed because I don't want to get caught. And that's sort of the middle of the road. Like my rule, my integrity is because I don't want to get busted. And then we get to the third level, which is where I'm not going to speed because I don't want to injure anybody on the road. I don't want to
Mm,
be an irresponsible driver. I don't want to scare elderly people, etc. And that's kind of where we ideally want to land. Our sense of integrity is that we want to create a better world for ourselves and for others. So when we're looking at this idea of karma, what we'll find, and I've certainly found this, Saturn is my chart ruler. And if you have Capricorn rising, Saturn is Capricorn or Aquarius
mhm.
because Saturn rules both. So Capricorn and Aquarius risers, Saturn is your chart ruler. And whatever planet rules your chart, you tend to be pretty immersed in the lessons of those charts. But what I have found pretty consistently is when I am acting outside of my own moral compass, when I'm doing something, and this happened more often when I was younger, like, for example, my girlfriends went through a shoplifting phase in high school. And I, being Capricorn, I was like very dubious about shoplifting because I didn't want to get in trouble. But there were a few times that I did something and, with much fear. And I felt like later on in my life, I had moved out of my house and we had a roommate. And we found out that that roommate had been stealing from us under our noses. And
Mm,
I thought, I feel like this is karma. Like
yeah.
the few little piddly things that I shoplifted, I feel like now I'm getting stolen from. And it was like Saturn had this way of showing me the lesson in a real felt, almost identical sense. And so I feel like Saturn does that to us. Like if you were to, cause somebody else suffering, probably something will come that will bring you to a similar feeling state that
Hmm.
that person had. And it's like, can we just bypass that and not have to do it? Well, yeah, of course, but you have to develop your own sense of integrity first. And then you really have to live by that integrity. It has to become, your set of moral values and internal laws. Like it's
Yes.
me creating this authority. It's me creating this internal law. And that's really how Saturn works, right? It's like
Yeah.
yeah, Saturn will cooperate with you, but you have to do your part.
So what you're describing there is perfect for karma and dharma because karma is the action and the consequence of the actions, where dharma is the code of conduct that we live by, the spiritual code of conduct, our integrity, the rules that we will not waver on. I know I have many, there's certain things that are in my code of conduct, integrity wise, that I will never compromise for anyone or anything. And sometimes people will say I'm stubborn because of that. I'm a Taurus, so of course I'm stubborn to an extent, but it's more about I know right from wrong, especially and even more so my own right and wrong that I won't change just because someone else wants me to change it, right? And I think that that's a lot of Saturn right there.
Yeah. And that's another thing too, is like because Saturn represents the lessons that have to be learned over time. Like what happens for me is a lot of times I will have a code of conduct. And then I'll like, for example, one of my codes of conduct currently, as you and I are recording this, we're moving into the US elections.
Mm,
One of my codes of conduct is that I will just not get into political discussions with people because I find it to be too activating and I don't
yeah.
want to argue with people. And it's just, that is not a way that I want to expend my energy. But every once in a while, I find myself, I'm swept in and I'm having a heated
Right.
conversation. And it's like, oh, wait. So then I have to pull in my Saturn energy and say, you know what? This is not in my integrity right now to have
Mm,
this conversation. So let's change the subject. And so Saturn also, that energy, there is a way of being able to work with it in real time. So it's not about I'm always being perfect
right.
because the inner critical energy will want you to always do it perfect. And your inner critic will beat you over the head if you have messed something up, right? It's your internal government that's like
Mm,
writing you the ticket, sending you to jail. And we don't really want that coming in either. So there's a part of working with your Saturn energy where it's real time work You're noticing when you've slipped out of integrity, but rather than writing yourself the proverbial ticket, you're like, oh, I'm going to fix this immediately right here and right now so that I bring myself back into balance.
Mm. Internal government. I love that. That's perfect for Saturn.
Oh, yeah, it's big time inner critic energy.
Oh,
And we'll talk
absolutely.
about it as we go through. I have seen it, I have my astrological opinion on what the most difficult
Mm.
Saturn placement is in terms of the loudness of your inner critic. So I'll share
Oh, I
that.
wonder if it's the same one that I feel is this is the loudest inner critic.
Probably.
It's probably one that I have. But yeah, no one's going to beat us up more than our own relationship to the energy of our Saturn. And to an extent, we're all aware of right from wrong, right? I mean, we are. But there are souls out there that just move throughout life and they really don't think about how their actions affect others. And they could be great people, but there's a selfishness there and they're not thinking about it. And sometimes I'm like, oh, I wish I could be more like that because I cared so much about, I'm not ever wanting to upset anybody or hurt their feelings. But at the end of the day, what I've realized, a la Saturn, boundaries. You can still be a kind person and tell somebody to, take a hike because you don't have to accept behaviors that don't align with your soul or your integrity out of not wanting to upset the apple cart. That's the difference. There's, when you're a caring person and you are definitely conscious of your actions, you're on the right side of Saturn. It may not always play out exactly how you want it to because we all have unique lessons that we have to learn here. But trusting, and I'm so big on this, Natha, you know this, we talk about this a lot. Just trusting when it comes to karma, the concept of karma, it's not about wishing bad on anybody. It's about pulling back, and you can be upset and you can be angry, but you have to understand it's about having an understanding that, okay, this happened and it sucks and it hurts and I'm upset and I'm angry and all the things, but I don't have to take action against anyone or anything because I know in my heart that I'm going to go on my journey in my integrity and I'm going to, as hard as this is, I'm going to wish that person or that institution, whatever it is, I'm going to wish them well. I'm going to forgive for myself and I'm going to move on and I'm going to do my Saturn. I'm going to continue with my lessons because at some point I will see how what happened with that situation has shaped me into the person I am today. And it's not about the other side of it. It's about you. It's about your integrity.
Well, yeah, and you're talking about some people have Saturn issues. Some people come in and will struggle a lot with Saturn.
Mm-hmm.
And those would be people that, look at like we see the terrible twos, right? 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds. And part of why it's so hard to deal with young kids like that is because they haven't learned Saturn yet. So
Right.
they're still in the like, I want it now. I don't care what your rules are. I'm going to do what I want phase. And so we also see different demographics of the population that get stuck in that.
Right.
And those are people that have, as we would call them, Saturn issues. It's like
Mm-hmm.
they haven't made the leap yet to understanding that the point isn't to just get mad at when somebody lays a boundary on us, to get mad when we get in trouble for doing
Right.
something. It's like we have to learn that when we get in trouble for something or when a boundary gets laid upon us, or even when we feel wronged by somebody, that it's not about retaliating or
Right.
blaming or saying, it's your fault I got caught or it's your fault. It's about saying, okay, I'm going to learn from this and I'm not going to do it again.
Right.
So Saturn issues, and a lot of people have them, Saturn issues are where you just can't quite get that you're the one responsible here. And
Mm.
you were sharing an example of when somebody, if somebody hurts you, it's like, yes, they hurt me, but I'm the one that's responsible for how I can react and for the lesson that I'm going to take from this situation. And so that's ultimately what we're doing with Saturn is we're looking for the lesson,
Mm.
what am I supposed to learn here?
Yeah.
Not, I'm so mad this happened to me.
Yeah. And then there are those that will abuse their Saturnian, their Saturn power, those in positions of power that it's, I am leader, hear me roar. That's another energy that could be a parent, that could be a grandparent, a teacher, and any kind of authority figure. We all know there's plenty out there that will assert that dominance in a very negative manner. And that's the lower end, the lower manifestation of Saturn. But again, that's in crewing serious karma for that soul. And that's their journey.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm,
Yeah.
I'm going to go back to the slides for a moment. Other notable Saturn periods, the Saturn square, again, age 36 to 37, and then again, ages 67 through 68. And then we'll come up against another Saturn opposition period, which I'm at now, happy, happy, joy, joy, ages 44 to 45, and then again, 74 to 75. And then we get to the closing square at 50 to 51, which also coincides with our Chiron return. So that can feel particularly a little challenging, like identity wounds and have I accomplished all I want to? It's sort of like that point of midlife crisis or crisis of consciousness, as I like to say. And then again, 83, 84. And then the second Saturn return occurs roughly between 58 and 60. And then the second Saturn return occurs approximately between the ages of 58 and 60. And then again, between 88 and 90. I think it's important to remember that with the second Saturn return, there's a level of mastery that has been attained, hopefully. And it's all about reaping the rewards, reaping the benefits of all of your hard work. That's provided you are doing your work, you are doing your Saturn work, and you're not repeating the same patterns that you might have done perhaps at that first Saturn return period between 28 and 30. So it's about pulling yourself back to that point in your life and asking yourself, reflecting and doing some deep soul work about what are the themes that are repetitive and what have I learned and how am I doing it differently? What have I mastered?
Yeah. And I think with every Saturn to Saturn transit, you are learning more and more. So we don't have to be fearful of every single Saturn transit, like, oh no, it's coming. But we can remember, I've learned a lot. And I think that, we talked about this last time in our Pluto talk. Pluto has been moving through Capricorn, which is one of the signs that Saturn rules. And so if you look back into your own life from late 2008 into early 2009, and you look at what you have had to master on a very deep level, on a very consistent, sometimes painful, sometimes very Pluto brings up our fears, but think of everything that you have done, the power that you have stepped into. And that's just a good way to remember that anything that involves Saturn, if we give it the time and the space, we really do come out the other end very equipped and very capable of success. So with every Saturn to Saturn transit, we show up with more tools and more wisdom. So they ideally become easier.
Yeah. Saturn tests our strength, shows us what we're made of, and shows us and mirrors back to us how resilient we truly are. And that's a good thing. We need that. We need those reminders. Even the very symbol of Capricorn is the sea goat that scales the mountaintop to get all the way to the top. And that is much like the embodiment of Saturn energy. It's where we're willing to keep working for all that we have. I thought this would be a good point to pull something in as an example. Robert Downey Jr., I'm going to show you something interesting because I always tell my clients, especially when they're approaching that second Saturn return or they're in it, we will go over things and I will say, listen, the first Saturn return, we don't really know. We're still trying to figure it out. We're trying to feel our way through the darkness. But when we get to the second Saturn return, we know more. We have a handle on what hasn't been working and what will work. And we have a lot more, hopefully, a lot more discipline to move toward that which will work for us. And so again, it's energy of, doing the work, you will get the reward. And I always found this fascinating. Let me share the screen. The inner wheel here is Robert Downey Jr.'s birth chart. You can see that he has his Saturn at 11 degrees and 59 minutes of Pisces, which means he's in his Saturn return as we speak because Saturn is in Pisces right now. But look at this. He won the Oscar for Best Supporting Role, for Best Supporting Actor. Excuse me, the name of the movie is escaping me right now. But look at where transiting Saturn was at the time of the Oscars when he won the Oscar. 11 degrees of Pisces. He was right smack at that exact moment of his second Saturn return. And I just love this because it shows that with hard work and perseverance, you get what you set out to achieve and accomplish. You achieve what you set out to, is what I should say. And he had some other things going on, not to make this a whole astrology lesson, but he was also in his Jupiter return. He had Uranus right on his moon, so in the 10th house, very public and an unexpected win for him, most likely. I'm sure he was hoping that he would win, but probably didn't think he was going to. And then here we have it. So again, that's just a really cool manifestation of how that second Saturn return can really bring in some great rewards, some benefits, and some positivity.
Yeah, I like that. And I think this is a good time to move into looking at Saturn through the
Yeah.
signs and the houses.
Let's do that. I do want to say one other thing, because as we keep mentioning about Saturn with the 7 year cycle, if you have a relationship with anyone in your life, especially if it's romantic and there's a 7 year age difference, Saturn brings, you might hear some negative things about Saturn, but I want to mention the positive side of Saturn, which is longevity, cement. He cements things, he's binding for better or worse. So Saturn does bring in challenges, but he also brings in commitment. So this is about really getting in touch with what and whom we're committed to, and if we're genuinely connected to these commitments in our lives. And then if you're genuinely connected to things, are you committing to them? Saturn asks us to do that. And especially when it comes to relationships, when there's 7 year, you hear the 7 year itch. Think about that. Like, why do we get the 7 year itch? What they say in relationships, 7 years, Saturn cycles. People come to this reevaluation of what they're doing, and they might not consciously be understanding that that's what's happening, but unconsciously, that's what's happening.
Yeah, I love that. All right, so I'll get us started. Lisa, you can add.
Mhm.
Remember that with Saturn, you're learning. Saturn is a great teacher. And so as you're looking at your chart, if you notice that you have either Saturn in Aries or Saturn in the first house, a lot of what you're going to be learning is, finding yourself. You're going to be asserting who you are, and you're going to be looking for your identity. And remember, with Saturn, we usually start off at a deficit. We usually start off feeling, it would be feeling in this case, like, I don't know how to have good boundaries, or I don't know who I am, or I don't know how to assert myself. I don't know how to control my energy. I don't know how to not pop off. And through time, as you progress, you are learning how to really harness in all of that Aries power. Aries is so incredibly powerful. You're learning how to harness it and use it. It's like instead of having the out of control bonfire, you are having a really hot stove that you can actually cook a delicious dinner on. And that's just a weird analogy, but this is where you're really learning how to step into your Aries power.
I find the key word for the Saturn in Aries is confidence. This is where you're really learning to have confidence, but not too much confidence that you overstep and you don't have any boundaries. There's always a shadow side to that Saturn placement. But in Aries, I feel like a lot of the lesson revolves around self-confidence, self-worth, the ability to be a leader, to take ownership and accountability for your own energy, much like what you just said, Natha.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, with Saturn and Aries, you might come out of the gate really strong, and people say, no way, I'm
Right,
not going to respect
right,
you. And
right.
so then you have to learn how to use that dominating energy in a way that people respect you, because that's also what we're learning with our Saturn is, how can I lead so that people respect me and want to follow me?
Right. And the other thing too is, especially if the chart holder doesn't have any other Aries placements except that Saturn, it does tell a deep story there. And you'll find that that person probably really does struggle with boundaries and confidence within their relationships.
All right. So with Saturn in Taurus or Saturn in the second house, this is one where you're trying to figure out your relationship to money, to abundance, to resources. And you might feel sometimes like, how come I don't make money in the same quickness that my friends do? Or how come I have all of these situations that challenge my sense of self-worth? But really, this is what you're learning. You're learning that Taurus skill of showing up and doing what needs to be done and having patience. And all of the earth signs are very connected. There's a lot of similar themes between Taurus, Virgo, and Capricorn. So this is going to feel like kind of a Saturn lesson on top of a Saturn lesson here. But man, if you can nail this lesson, you are going to be somebody at these thresholds of your Saturn transits where you're going to start to build wealth, and you are going to start to really get clear on how to show up and how to really use your strength and your capacity for endurance and even that stubbornness you're going to know how to use it to generate success.
Mm, yeah. I think of Saturn in all of the earth signs, Taurus, Virgo, and Capricorn, as an immovable rock, but we have to learn that that rock does have to move in order to have us grow and do things differently, that our way is not always the only way or the right way. And it's about being open to other viewpoints. But I find Saturn in Taurus or Saturn in the second house to also be very strong lessons about the way that we value ourselves and our relationship to our body, to our bodies, how we take care of ourselves. It's our physical health and our financial health. And also, there's this energy of the spiritual and the material and how those two coalesce.
Yeah. All right. So Saturn in Gemini or Saturn in the third house. This is going to relate to your communication, to your ability to connect with people, and you're learning how to really organize your thoughts. This is also working with your mind and working to create a sense of mind control for yourself, because the mind can be our worst enemy. As you know, Lisa, with tarot, that the swords cards are the ones that cause us the most trouble.
Mm,
So this is a placement. These are placements where you might find like, I have to stop overthinking, or I have to like really be mindful of the information that I let into my field. If it's going to throw me out of balance, I need to be careful about how I communicate with people. Like
yeah.
there's a lot of being very disciplined when it comes to what's coming into your mind and what's coming out of your mouth.
Yeah. And also with Saturn in Gemini, Saturn in the third house, there's a really strong energy of not always having to speak and to keep some things to yourself and to be boundaried on what you choose to share. There's always that double-edged sword here with the Saturn energy. And I find that Saturn in any of the mutable signs, which is Gemini, Pisces, Virgo, Sagittarius, I have found, Natha, I don't know if this is your study or what you found, but a lot of people really struggle with heavy OCD tendencies by where this is in their chart and in their lives, because it's like think of it as the hamster on the wheel, because Saturn gives us that energy of where we can really beat ourselves up mercilessly, like we don't stop. And so when you've got mutable energy, which is always moving and changing and it's fluctuating by the day, by the minute sometimes, it can be very challenging. So learning to streamline your thoughts before they come out of your mouth is extremely important with Saturn here.
Yeah, I agree. All right, so Saturn in Cancer or Saturn in the fourth house. This is about learning how to have emotional responsibility, how to really honor your feelings, but also be very pragmatic about your feelings too. Our feelings are similar to our mind. They come in and they bring us a lot of potent information that's useful, but sometimes our feelings can run the show. And feelings are so in and out. Like we get triggered if we haven't eaten enough that day, or if we're on our cycle as a female. There's all these ways that our emotions can come in and kind of tell us a false story. So I look at Saturn in Cancer as like really learning how to be boundaried in your emotional expression, but also learning how to feel and learning how to use feelings as a way to understand your world. And Saturn in the sign of Cancer is these are opposing energies in the chart. So there's always, it's a little bit harder when we're looking at Saturn in a sign that it's Cancer is the detriment to
Right.
Saturn, or to Capricorn. So this is a trickier one if you have it, but also there can be so much leaning into feeling and leaning into understanding family and mothering that comes along with this placement.
Yeah. And I find that this particular Saturn placement will often struggle with what family feels like. Perhaps they didn't have the most normal, quote unquote, upbringing. They weren't close to the family. Remember that Saturn represents the elders in our lives, the parents, and the sign of Cancer is traditionally the mother, but it can also be talking about the father. It could be talking about, the parental unit as a whole and the family dynamic. So an individual Saturn in Cancer can really struggle with emotions and even situations surrounding those people, the family of origin. And as they move about the world and they start to build their family of choice, they have to be careful that they're not always trying to be the parent to someone else, or that they're not always looking for a parent in their relationship. So it takes a lot of conscious effort and recognition. I do find this to be one of the more challenging Saturn placements. Absolutely.
All right, Saturn and Leo. And what I find when I'm doing chart readings for people with Saturn and Leo is it's like you are trying to learn, first of all, about yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You're trying to learn who you are, but you're also trying to learn how to have fun and how to be big. And usually what I see in charts is when you are born with Saturn and Leo or Saturn in the fifth house, there could have been situations in your childhood where you were told to like shut it down. You're too
Mm-hmm.
big. Stop being such a show off. And there's this diminishment of this fire energy, this creativity, that then as you get older, you have to learn how to let go of that conditioning that says stop being so big, and creativity is not important, and you have to really get into like, God, I can be big. I can
Right.
dabble in all of the creative endeavors that I want.
You're allowed to take up space when you have this Saturn placement, but you also have to allow others their center stage and spotlight moments as well, so that you keep that karma balanced.
Oh yeah, I like that. So Saturn and Virgo. Now, this is one of the signs that I see as people with Saturn and Virgo having the loudest inner critic.
Oh,
And part of
hello.
that
I can
is that
attest to that. I have Saturn in Virgo in the fifth house. Okay. So I'm just like a double whammy over here.
oh my God, yeah. Yeah. And I mean, that's the thing with Virgo, is you've heard me say, I think that Virgo is one of the trickiest archetypes for us to
Yeah.
work with because we're so indoctrinated with the Virgo things of being good, doing it right, not messing it up, making sure that the adults around you approve of you. And so here, when you have Saturn in Virgo, it's like this double or triple whammy of I'm trying to work with, you know, I don't want to get in trouble. And
Right.
that's a Virgo thing. I don't want to get in trouble. And yet here I have this Saturn that is constantly has me in personal trouble.
Yeah.
If it's not the outside world, which frankly, if you have Saturn in Virgo, you're not getting in trouble from the adults because you're really good.
That is
It's
very
that
true.
internal critic.
Yeah. And with Saturn in Virgo, I will always know when I'm in the wrong. And believe me, no one's going to beat me up mentally, verbally, than I will myself, because that's just how it is with Saturn in Virgo. And I've really had to learn how to let go of control and to understand that you can only do what you can do. You can put in the work, but at some point you have to pull back and release control, which is very challenging for Saturn in general because Saturn wants control. And then so does Virgo. So Saturn in Virgo, it's like really, really there. It's really in your face. And so you really do learn more about your own level of patience, your own relationship to being a perfectionist, and how perfection is an impossibility. And it is rewarding over time, but like every one of the Saturn placements, but it's exhausting, and you have to silence that inner critic.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's really important for Saturn in Virgo and Saturn in the sixth house people to learn how to get off your own back and to
Yeah.
learn that this idea of perfection has to come through what I call the holy perfection, not the human
Right.
perfection.
Right.
Because it's like you guys could like work your fingers to the bone and it
Yeah.
could still not be good enough. But
That's
when
true.
you're leaning into the trust of like, I've done enough, it's
Right.
good enough.
Yep.
That's where you find the holy perfection. And that's where you can take a deep breath and know, like, I'm committing to service of the higher good. And I
Right.
know that I'm here doing that.
Absolutely.
All right. So Saturn in Libra. So Saturn, I should say, is exalted in the sign of Libra.
Hmm.
So what that means is that Saturn really appreciates the balance, the diplomacy of Libra. Saturn loves it when there's harmony and when things run smoothly. So that's part of what you're learning with Saturn and Libra is you're in the AP class for learning how to create balance and learning how to deal with life, with people, with relationships, with fairness and balance.
Yeah.
What you may end up having to do is not concentrate so much on like making sure that everybody is happy, which is
Mm.
a Libra issue. I don't want to rock the boat. but
Right.
more making sure that things feel good, that they're in alignment. It's like, we're not going to eat Mexican food tonight, even though you really want to, but we're going to eat Mexican food later this week. So everyone's happy. And it's like, that's really what we're cultivating here.
Saturn in Libra, as you mentioned, it's really critical that we're weighing out the sides of everything when it comes to our relationships, the balance, the give and take. We don't want to overgive, but we also don't want to undergive. We want to make sure that the reciprocity is there and that we will often have to put up boundaries with Saturn here about making sure that we're not just swimming into other people's space and merging into what they want, that so much so that we lose our identity or pieces of it. So our relationships, Libra is the sign of relationships, as is the seventh house. It's the mirror. So we're going to be finding a lot of our lessons through the others in our lives when our Saturn's here.
Yeah, I have Saturn in the seventh. And I will say it has not been easy in terms
Right,
of long-term relationships, because this is the life's great work. And with life's great work, you often have to keep starting over.
right.
But there's a richness that has
Yes,
begun to develop in relationship for me personally that I would not have been able to touch when I was younger.
right. Again, maturation.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So Saturn in Scorpio, or Saturn in the eighth house, this is really learning a lot about mastery over fear. And I think that, as we've had Pluto in the sign of Capricorn over the last 15 years, that's largely what we've been mastering, is looking at the authority and saying, here's what I see and here's what I'm fearful of, and really coming to terms with that. And
yeah,
so if you have Saturn in either of these placements, I would suggest really getting serious about your interpersonal work, whether that's finding yourself a therapist, just doing the spiritual work, whatever it is to help you deepen into your own psychology, but
yeah.
with structure. And one of the things with Saturn that I like to say is, Saturn says stop talking about it and start doing it. And so with Saturn in these placements, you have immense personal power, but you have to understand your shadow. You have to be willing to face your shadow first. And the easiest way to do that is to just put some structure to it. Meet with a therapist every few weeks,
Right,
take classes, find a mentor that can teach you about your attachment style, all of these kinds of things.
right. I find with this Saturn placement, particularly Saturn in the eighth, oftentimes we are our own worst enemy here. And other times we've been hurt and or seriously betrayed, and in some cases even abused by those that we trusted, those authority figures, those that were left to care for us in some capacity. And so now we have to untangle all of that deep betrayal and all of that stuff that we've likely repressed because it's too painful and we don't want to go into that shadow space. So there's definitely a very deep transformative quality here when we are dealing with Saturn. I also feel one of the tougher Saturn placements for sure.
Yeah, and there's something too about ideally becoming the person that is holding the center
Yeah.
when there's chaos around you.
Yeah.
So becoming the person in your life, in your circle, in your family that says things are really hard right now and it's going to be okay. So
Right.
you're also learning how to do that for yourself and for others.
And learning how to trust again,
Mhm.
after, especially if you've been betrayed deeply.
Yeah. All right. Saturn and Sag, Saturn in the ninth house. This is definitely about looking at your belief systems. And we're taught so much when we're younger, and a lot of us take what we were taught when we were younger as the gospel truth.
Right.
And with Saturn here, it says you must get out into the world, you must explore, and you must challenge what you believe to be true. And you can challenge that by seeking out higher education, by traveling, by meeting with people that are different than you, because in order to really cultivate your body of knowledge, which will become your mastery, you can't just exist on the very first things that you were taught or that you learned.
This one's a tough one because Saturn is the great contractor and Sagittarius is the expansive one. It's ruled by Jupiter. So it's like, Jupiter is expansive, Jupiter expands, and Saturn constricts and contracts. So it's like, well, how do I get out of my own way to live my life and have these new experiences and be free in some capacity, and to continue to explore, knowing that I'm able to change my mind, to change my views, to change my beliefs and live a little. This is challenging too, because it's too much information is also a trick with Saturn here. Too much information can be a detriment, because then we never take that knowledge and actually do anything with it, because we're too immersed in just constantly learning more. So there could be too much structure here as well. There's always two sides, right? Two things can be true at once.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that makes Saturn so complicated is
Yeah.
like we're like, wait, what are we supposed to be doing? What are we
Right.
supposed to be looking at? And we really don't know until we're just on the journey.
Right.
So Saturn in Capricorn, Saturn in the 10th house, Saturn rules Capricorn, so it's very comfortable here. But what I have seen with my Saturn in Capricorn clients is that there is an inherent frustration because Capricorn wants to be the expert. And that's really what we're moving toward, is mastery. However, nobody is a master when they're also a novice. And so we see this in the like, I just want it now. I
Right.
know I'm good enough, and I know enough, and I just want it now. But we are not born with respect, and we must actually pay our dues before people will respect us. So the Saturn in Capricorn, Saturn in the 10th house people, there's a frustration. It's like, why are you treating me like I'm a baby when I'm more mature than my peers, but yet I'm not grown up yet, kind of
Right.
mentality.
Right. And I find with this one, I often say the only thing that grows in comfort zones is complacency. So we have to be careful here about not getting so comfortable that we end up not stretching, not growing, not changing, and we become our own authority only and always. And we're not really open to others' viewpoints and behaviors. So we have to watch the tendency for that as well. And then also for taking on the responsibility of our peers and of everyone else, to the point that then we get so frustrated because we're not allowing anybody else to step in and help us, because, oh, I've got it, I've got it, I've got it. And then you don't got it. And now it becomes a problem. And let's not forget, Saturn, Capricorn, that's the structure of our body also. That's our bones. That's the container, the skeletal system. So after a certain amount of time, the body will start to break down from all the demands that the emotional and spiritual parts of us are putting on the body.
Yeah, we have to be careful that we're not overworking and overdoing it. And this is where we would go into the balancing act of going back into our Cancerian
Right.
energy, our Cancerian placements of feeling and going into retreat
Right.
occasionally.
Right.
All right, so Saturn in Aquarius, and Saturn is the traditional ruler of Aquarius. At this point, we have a modern rule, which is Uranus. But Saturn is also very comfortable in Aquarius, but the energy is slightly different because this is the energy of innovation.
Right.
This is where you're not so stuck on learning the traditional mastery. You're looking at how to improve,
Right.
and how to be slightly different, and how to approach things differently. I think that Saturn here, sometimes you have work around friendships. You can have to do work around relationships. But this is also just about really finding your place in society and in the group. And you'll probably come up against scenarios where you feel ostracized, or you feel different than
Right.
or othered. And you'll come up against scenarios where you feel like conforming is the way to go. And so you're playing around with like, where do I fit here?
Yeah. Yeah. And then also it's like you really want to assert your individuality in a way, but at the same time, you want to have the respect of others and of your peers. So it can get a little weird, it can get a little sticky with Saturn here.
Yeah, and I always see Saturn in the 11th of charts, and I think this is somebody that like doesn't like people and yet is always like, why don't I have any friends? So
Yeah.
there's this sense of like, I have to find where I fit. I have to find my
Yeah.
people.
And also watching that you don't fall into that know-it-all mentality in groups, because that could really turn people off when you might be trying to connect by showing what you know and showing that you have the similar mindset, but they might be taking it as, ooh, that person thinks that they know everything. I don't want to be around them. So we have to watch the tendency for that. of trying to be everyone's teacher and the only authority when we have Saturn here.
All right, so Saturn in Pisces and Saturn in the 12th. And I want to point out that as we sit here in October of 2023, Saturn is in the sky in the sign of Pisces. So this energy is energy that if you're listening to this soon, you can feel into it and really get a felt sense of how it is, because Saturn in Pisces is a really tricky one. It's like you were saying, where there's this conflict where Pisces is boundaryless and Saturn is the boundaries. And Saturn is the logic. It's the, we follow these rules and we follow this structure and we're here to improve. And Pisces basically says, well, I don't care about your structure. What structure? Right. What's improvement? Like there's nothing to be done. It's only to be felt, to be received. And so there's this interesting conundrum that I think Saturn and Pisces people are faced with, where
absolutely,
yeah, they're trying to figure out like, wait, what am I doing? My instructions are unclear.
Right. And I think that this can work really well on the higher end because Saturn, the planet of boundaries, often needs to soften. And then Pisces, the planet of, the symbol for Pisces, I always say, bring it back to the symbol, the two fish swimming in opposite directions. It's, it's trying to find its way and it's feeling its way through everything. And having that energy often needs us to have that structure that Saturn can provide. But it's about finding that balance. And there's always a very strong spiritual component with Saturn here. And we can even see this collectively as we're talking about this, that the collective, humankind, divinity, everything is coming together in a different way, in a deeper way than ever before. There are more people that are really leaning into the spiritual side of life that much more deeply, their faith, human altruism, all of the things that Pisces really stands for, because we can have that, but we can also have the rules and the boundaries. We can have both.
Yeah.
And we can swim through both.
Yes. And when I see Saturn in the 12th, I also tend to look at it like you have come in from past life situations where you were seeking to master your spiritual connection in some way.
Yep.
And so you come in with a lot of spiritual knowledge, but you have to wait for it to reveal. It's not going to be there immediately. It's going to be a life of allowing what you already know to finally show itself. And that can be difficult in and of itself because we don't like to wait.
Right. And also with Saturn here, you want to have a spiritual practice that you can rely on. And that can be something as simple as going for a walk every day at a certain time. And that's your time to just decompress and take your attention away from any electronics and just to be with yourself, to have that connectedness, because Saturn here needs to feel connected to something outside of self, to connect it to some source of a higher power, whatever that is for you. So if you are struggling and you have Saturn here, it's about really leaning into your faith in a different way, in a deeper way, allowing yourself to believe things to be true that you may not have ever allowed yourself to believe before. But it's really about what you feel. Very intuitive.
I like that. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing. I'll say one more thing before we wrap up, which is, you touched on it. With Saturn, it's always great to invite structure into the story.
Right.
So whether you're walking the same time every single night, or you have hired a mentor or a coach to help you, or you're pulling an oracle card, or you're just committing to some sort of regularity with whatever it is that you're trying to learn, it can really go a long way in helping you accelerate your Saturn lessons.
Now, there's something that we really didn't touch on, and I feel like we should do a part 2, obviously not right now, but I think we should go and talk about the past life implications for each Saturn placement, because we really didn't do that, but I think that that could be a very nice part 2 for an even deeper understanding, because that's where you really have those light bulb aha moments. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I love that.
So I think we'll do that. If you're good with that, I think we should do that.
Yeah, let's do it.
So know that this was a lot to digest. And I apologize because I am feeling very scattered with these energies the past 2 days. Like I have so much to say, so much is up here. And when I go to articulate, it's like, it's not coming out the way I think it is. So hopefully that was easy enough to follow along with.
Yeah, I'm laughing because if you guys could see, you guys will see the edited version of this, but if we were to do like a blooper section, Lisa and I were laughing like crazy.
I don't know what's going on today. between the
Yeah, we were
noises outside and the not being able to get words out and the like I'm normally not like that.
Yeah, so know
Okay.
that we were having fun behind the scenes and that you get
Yes.
to see the professional version, but
Yes. Yes. And we will come back with a part two for the karmic side, the more past life driven side to Saturn. So let us know down below in the comments if you appreciated this, what you would like to hear more about. And we're going to try our best to get back here really soon and record again.
yeah,
And again, all of
awesome.
our links are in the description box below. You can find everything there, sessions, courses, podcasts, etc. Natha, thank you for joining me. This was a lot of fun as always.
Yes, this was so fun. And thank you all for joining us. And thank you for having me, Lisa. And I
Of
shall
course,
talk to you soon.
take good care, everyone. Bye.